This is the Mark Milton Show with The Smash, with former Department of Justice Tax Division trial attorney Mark Milton and The Smash on 590 The Fan and 590thefan.com.
All right, welcome to the Mark Milton Show with The Smash, broadcasting from the Miller Furniture Studios here in Kirkwood, Missouri. I want to give a shout out to Miller Furniture. They are currently having a half-price sale that actually started this week and runs through July 7th. Their half-price sale, everything in their store is half off the list price, so anything in stock.
Everything?
And select custom orders are as well. So they've got solid wood, American-made furniture options at any store, more than any store in the St. Louis area. So go check them out at millerfurniture.com. It's MUELLER furniture.com. You can stop by their Belleville or Lake St. Louis location. We are very fortunate today to have as our first guest, Smash, Senator Bill Eigel out of Weldon Springs, Missouri. He represents a large chunk of St. Charles County. Senator Eigel, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. One of the things we want to, I am a tax lawyer. It's an area of interest of mine. And one of the things I personally have been an outspoken advocate against is the personal property tax that applies to both individuals and businesses. And Senator Eigel, for the last 2 years, has sponsored legislation to repeal the personal property tax in Missouri. So I thought it would be interesting to have him on to hear his perspective, to kind of hear about what the bill would do, at least what the proposed legislation would do. So, Senator Eigel, tell us about your proposal and what it would accomplish.
Yeah, you bet. Actually, I've actually been in office now going on 4 years, and my theme has been to look for every way possible to cut the tax burden on Missouri taxpayers. And probably the item that gets the most attention and is the most popular of the initiatives I've proposed is the one that would move Missouri away from levying the personal property tax on your cars, your campers. It's that unpleasant bill we all get on December 1st that we got to write a check to the state of Missouri just to keep our cars and vehicles on the roads. A little bit of background about personal property tax in Missouri. Most people don't realize that Missouri is actually in a minority of states that even have a personal property tax. In fact, only 21 out of the 50 states have a personal property tax, and from amongst those 21 states, we have the third highest rate of personal property tax in the entire country. So it's a burdensome tax. It places a huge burden on our working and middle-class households, and it's something I think that we ought to be able to get away from. So I've introduced legislation, as you mentioned, Mark, for the past couple of years that would move us away from it would eliminate personal property tax, and it would instill in our Constitution a prohibition against such. So we've made a little bit of progress over the past couple of years. Last year, we were able to get it out of the Senate committee, and this year we actually got it to the Senate floor. So my hope is we're going to continue finding the right answer as we move forward and move away from that institution.
Sure. And Senator Eigel is a business owner himself. I mean, he's a small business owner, and that's one of the things I don't think people realize with personal property tax is that it hits not only individuals but also business owners. Can you talk about what your legislation would do to impact the personal property tax as it relates to businesses?
Same thing. So it would move us away from personal property tax, both for personally owned personal property and business owned personal property. So you're right. A couple of things. When I was a small business owner, I had a forklift as an example. We had to pay personal property tax on that. Equipment that you have to pay personal property tax on. All of that would now no longer be taxed, and we would eliminate that burden for businesses. So it's something, because the rate of taxation is so high, it actually is a very regressive tax. So as a percentage of your income, the less you make, the greater percentage of your income that you have to pay towards personal property tax. So this is something that actually targets our working and middle class households. So it's absolutely something we need to get away from, and all we have to do is follow a majority of the states that have already done it.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the regressive nature, that also applies to small businesses, because I've seen, a lot of small businesses don't even realize this is a requirement, that they have to submit a separate personal property tax declaration for their business and pay taxes on things like desks, furniture, computers. It's really crazy when you think about, as a small business, what could possibly have, that you might have to pay tax on.
Wow.
And have you looked at even like the compliance rate? Because I suspect that for most small businesses, they have no idea they even have this obligation. And if they were to fully comply with it, it would cost them, I mean, the burden on them to hire an accountant to prepare this, declaration and the tax return itself would impose a great burden.
Well, absolutely. And like many of these complicated tax codes that we have throughout the country, a lot of folks don't understand just how far the tax code will actually go if fully implemented to the letter of the law. So, as I said, most states have gotten away from this personal property tax, and I think that certainly we can too. So we looked at actually what was the cost to it, and right now it makes up about 15% of our local revenues. And I think that if we were able to phase the personal property tax out over a plan that slowly reduces it down to zero over maybe 5 years, the natural inflationary increases that we're seeing for revenues elsewhere would actually prevent us from seeing any drops in revenue at the local level. So we get the best of both worlds. We don't see any dramatic drops in overall revenues for local communities, but at the same time, we've gotten rid of a very burdensome tax. So you're absolutely right. And one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about compliance is the idea that I think most everyone knows a neighbor or a friend or an acquaintance that licenses their vehicles in other states to avoid paying the personal property tax. So there's a case to be made that we're leaving a lot of revenue on the table as folks try to naturally avoid paying this burdensome tax. So it really is the best of all worlds to get away from it.
Now, and you touched on this a little bit. So critics would say, well, if you look at your personal property tax bill, at least in St. Louis County, it breaks down sort of where all of your money goes, where all that, and a lot of it's funding local schools, local, I think fire districts and things you can't even really understand. I mean, there's literally like a dozen things that are listed out there. So, critics would say, well, you're going to, impose a burden on these local municipalities. They're not going to have revenue. What do you say to that argument with respect to repealing the personal property tax?
Sure. Well, I'd say two things. One, I've been a Republican for most of my life, and one of the major planks of the Republican Party is that we like to cut taxes. And I believe that when we cut taxes, that in and of itself leads to growth. For the past couple of years, we've been cutting income taxes at the state level. We cut income taxes 2 years ago. We cut our income tax rate from 5.9% down to 5.4%. And even though we cut the rate, our revenues the very next year and the year after came in at new record levels because cutting taxes leads to growth. And the more you cut taxes, the more you unleash the innovation of the free market that actually built the country in the first place. So I've never met a tax that I didn't think could actually be cut, because when you cut those taxes, it also requires government to be more efficient. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to cut these taxes, especially something like this. So the other thing that I would say is, of course, that in the way that the personal property tax works versus the regular property tax, which is the property tax you pay on your house, if we phase it out over a period of time, over a horizon of maybe 5 years, the Constitution allows for natural inflationary increases in your regular property tax bill, which right now local areas are just using to add to their budgets. Well, instead, I'd like to see those inflationary increases go to consume and slowly phase out the personal property tax. So I don't think you're going to see any gaps or problems at the local level, but we can put Missouri on a far more competitive advantage economically.
Yeah, I totally agree with the competitive angle, because I think eliminating something like this, even if, I'm a staunch Republican as well, I'm not a favor of taxes, but I would rather see a nominal increase in my real estate property tax bill than to have to deal with submitting the declaration every year and paying the personal property tax every year, having to go to the DMV and show them proof that I've paid my personal property tax before I can renew my life. I mean, it's a very complicated thing to have to do for such a small amount of money. It seems like we could make up that revenue elsewhere and eliminate the burden imposed on not only individuals but also businesses.
No question. No question. This is actually the first state. Before I got into politics, I was a military veteran. I served in the Air Force for 8 years. I had 3 different assignments before I eventually moved to the state of Missouri. And Missouri was the first state I lived in that actually had a personal property tax. So a lot of states have already set up their governments and services to not include something that's as burdensome as personal property tax. It really is up to Missouri to imitate the policies that have been successful elsewhere.
Let me ask you, Senator Smash, with you here. And my main thing is I'm listening to you talk, listening to Mark talk over here. How many people in Missouri are not paying this tax? What percentage of folks out of the 100% are we losing that tax money on?
You're talking about folks that are licensing their vehicles in other states to get around the tax?
Whether they're doing that or not even paying it at all.
Or maybe their business isn't even
Exactly
paying
right.
it.
Yeah.
Well, so what I can tell you is the average number of vehicles that are owned per household is 2.1 to 2.2 vehicles per household. So most every person in Missouri, which has an address in Missouri, should be paying this tax. And of course, a lot of them aren't because they have an address in another state that they're using to license vehicles to get around that, or they're just not reporting it via their business. So there's no way, unfortunately, that we'll be able to actually understand what those numbers look like until we eliminate the tax.
Yeah.
And those folks want to naturally come back and start registering their cars here. It could be a really big number. We've got 4 million licensed drivers alone in the state of Missouri. So there's a lot of vehicles out there that may not be licensed that we could capture here in the state of Missouri. But that's never going to be a reality as long as we have such a burdensome and broken system as personal property tax.
So where obviously the session has ended for this year. I mean, what do you see the future of this legislation? I mean, do you see it getting passed maybe next year? Any chance for a special session? And where do you see this headed? What needs to happen, I guess?
Probably not a special session. I think one of the reasons that it got as far as it did this year was not only the work that I was doing down in Jefferson City, but the reality that this is an incredibly popular agenda item for the people of Missouri. In fact, when we first came out with we unveiled our proposed legislation to do this, we got responses and phone calls from around the state, not just my Senate district, but Senate districts all across Missouri, that folks were standing up and saying, we can find a better way to do business and move away from personal property tax. So we were able to get it to a floor discussion this year. I think that I'm optimistic we can get it out of the Senate next year and through the House. If in its current format, it would actually have to be voted on by the people, although we're looking at some statutory changes that would have ultimately the same effect of moving us away from it.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you got anything else, Smash, on the personal property tax?
I just was thinking to myself, Senator, let's say I'm driving a Bentley, but I'd rather have them think I'm driving an Escape. Is there anything that I can do to possibly camouflage the actual wheels that I'm riding on?
Well, I'm probably not an expert in how to sort
not legal. I would say not legally, Smash. There's probably no way to legally
save some money.
But each year you're required to let your county know what vehicles you have. You know, different counties have different mechanisms to ensure accountability. And certainly it starts when you purchase the vehicle. That data is reported to the state when you pay your initial sales tax on that purchase. So there's ways around it, certainly. And the biggest one, of course, is if you have any kind of property outside of the state where you can license your vehicle in other states. But either way, it's a system that has holes in it, and it's a system that is not reflective of the actual vehicles that are going onto our roads each year, because, well, we've got people registering in other states. So I think it's something we certainly need to address.
So you know what states they are, Senator. Should I move to Illinois, or what would be a good state for me to be living in?
You know, it breaks my heart that Illinois actually does something better than Missouri does when it comes to personal property tax. I can't say that very often, but they don't have personal property tax. Now, to be fair, they've made up for the lack of personal property tax by overwhelming their citizens with a variety of other taxes, property taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, and other facets of their society. But they don't have a personal property tax. So if Illinois can get by without having a personal property tax, Missouri can absolutely get by.
Well, I applaud your efforts on the personal property tax.
Bravo.
And while we have you here, I thought we could talk about sort of how the state is doing from a fiscal standpoint with, COVID. I've talked about on the show before how, we have a situation here where not only is the government sort of spending unprecedented amounts of money to keep people afloat in terms of unemployment and some of the stimulus, but we're also losing revenue when you think about employees not working, employers not having to pay employment taxes, sales taxes. You think about, I heard on the news that the city of St. Louis generates $200,000 in sales tax revenue for every Cardinal game. Every home game generates. So really? How is the state doing from a budgetary standpoint in terms of revenue?
Sure. Well, the first thing I always say whenever we have any discussion about the state budget, the first thing that needs to be understood is that the state has been bringing in and spending record amounts of money every single year for the past decade leading into 2020. So we've expanded our rate of expenditures and revenue by an average of 4 to 5% every single year. Ahead of inflation, we've been expanding government. And to be fair, I think that we haven't done a good job as we've expanded that government, finding the areas of waste within that $35 billion state budget that would help make us better prepared for seasons like we have right now. I'll give you an example. In our state government right now, we have 55,000 funded positions. However, of those 55,000 funded positions, as of 30 days ago, 3,500 of them were not filled. There was nobody in the position. The position was vacant. And currently, there's a hiring freeze given the current COVID environment. And yet, we still funded every one of those 3,500 empty positions. I offered amendments and tried to get changes to the budget that would at least strip out the positions we literally are not even using, and we couldn't even get that passed through the legislature. So I got to be honest, I feel like the legislature has a lot of work to do in terms of making our budget far more efficient. Our biggest government program, which is the Medicaid program in Missouri, was found by a third-party McKinsey Institute audit to have more than $1 billion of waste in that program every single year. One of the items that they found as part of that waste was Missouri is the only state in the union, 1 out of 50, that actually double compensates hospitals in the state of Missouri when those hospitals treat out-of-state patients here in Missouri. So, for example, when a Kansas Medicaid patient comes to Missouri for service, not only does that hospital get reimbursed by Kansas, it gets also reimbursed by the state of Missouri. We're the only state that does that, and it costs us $200 million unnecessary dollars a year. So,
wait a second. That is, how is that possible?
$200 million.
Well, no, I'm saying so that's legal. These hospitals can double bill both states.
It is authorized within our state code that we will, in addition to the out-of-state reimbursement they get from the whichever state the patient came from, they also get a reimbursement from the state of Missouri. It's right there in our state code. I offered an amendment on the Senate floor to eliminate that particular procedure, but unfortunately, we always talk about special interest. You know what the most powerful special interest is in the state of Missouri right now?
What's that?
It's the Missouri Hospital Association.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a tremendous amount of influence. They're trying to get Medicaid expansion passed right now. And right from their perspective, it has nothing to do with the quality of health care they're trying to provide to their patients. It has to do with the fact that expanding Medicaid could potentially mean a couple $2 billion in annual windfalls for Missouri hospitals. And they have been leaning very hard to keep not only the good deals they have in place, like the double reimbursements that they have for out-of-state individuals, but also they want to pass bad policy like Medicaid expansion so that the system will actually get worse, but to their short-term fiscal benefit.
Wow.
So any discussion about the Missouri state budget starts with the idea that the state of Missouri has plenty of revenue. They have plenty of revenue. Even in the face of the COVID crisis, there are innumerable ways that we could be able to bring that government number down and have plenty left over to spare.
Let me ask you this, Senator. The first time you got into the hallowed halls of the Senate there, was it like a kid going to Disneyland for his first time, or what was the emotion in there, Senator?
I remember my initial weeks 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And my initial weeks, I had a very significant sense of humility that I was actually in the capital of the state representing 170,000 people from St. Charles.
Yeah.
I quickly came to find out that in that building, though, there are dozens upon dozens of special interests that are being paid to be in that building to promote their particular agenda.
Right.
And their agenda may or may not align with the good wishes and intentions and well-being of your constituents. So Medicaid expansion is a classic example of something that will benefit a very few number of individuals, but could put the state of Missouri on a fiscal trajectory that leads to disaster within the next 10 years.
Wow. Fascinating stuff. Well, Senator Bill Eigel from Weldon Springs, St. Charles County, U.S. Air Force veteran, small businessman. We really appreciate your insight. I personally am rooting for you in terms of the personal property tax repeal.
I'm in.
As Smash is on board.
Unless I'm moving to Illinois, but otherwise I'm in.
We might have to get some, what do they call those public PSAs sponsored by Smash to repeal the personal property tax. We really appreciate you being with us. We wish you the best, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thanks,
awesome,
Senator.
guys. Thanks for having me this morning. You guys have a great afternoon.
You too. All right, you're listening to the Mark Milton Show with the Smash, broadcasting from the Miller Furniture Studios here in Kirkwood, Missouri. We'll be right back.